Good morning, everyone. I call this session of the Public Service Commission to order. Madam Secretary, are there any changes to the final agenda?
Yes, good morning. There's one change to the consent agenda, item number 265, in case 21M0238 is pulled.
Thank you very much. Okay, with that, I will now conduct a roll call of the commissioners. When I call your name, please confirm that you are with us today. Commissioner Diane Berman.
Present.
Commissioner James Alessi. Commissioner Tracy Edwards.
I am here.
Commissioner John Howard.
Here.
Commissioner David Valesky.
Here.
Commissioner John Majori.
Here.
All right, we have quorum. Thank you, everyone. We'll move to the regular agenda. Our first item for discussion, item 301, case 15-E-0302, as it relates to initiating a process regarding the zero emissions target. It'll be presented today by Justin Gundlach. Robert Haberman, Elizabeth Grisaru, and Marco Padula are available for questions. Justin, please begin.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. Yep. My name is Justin Gundlach. I'm a Senior Advisor for Policy Implementation at the Department of Public Service. Item 301 relates to the need to identify and deploy zero-emissions dispatchable resources to meet the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act's requirement that the state's electric grid be zero emissions by 2040. The CLCPA directs that the Commission establish a program to achieve two basic targets in the electric sector. First, that by 2030, at least 70% of electric load is served by renewable energy, it's the 70 by 30 target. And second, that by 2040, there are zero emissions associated with electrical demand in the state, the zero emissions by 2040 target. Following enactment of the CLCPA at its October 2020 session, the Commission issued an order adopting modifications to the Clean Energy Standard. That order was meant to align the existing Clean Energy Standard with these electricity sector targets. The pathway established by the Clean Energy Standards Modification Order focuses on options for procuring sufficient renewable energy resources to hit both targets. As explained in today's proposed order, several studies indicate that commercially available renewable and energy storage resources alone may not satisfy electric system reliability needs as electricity generation comes into compliance with the zero by 2040 target. These studies suggest that a gap will emerge between capabilities of available clean energy technologies and system reliability standards. The Independent Power Producers of New York, the New York State Building and Construction Trades Council, and the New York State AFL-CIO also raised an issue about this gap in a petition filed in the Clean Energy Standard proceeding in August of 2021. The proposed order acknowledges issues raised in that petition and initiates a commission-driven process to identify technologies that can close the gap between the capabilities of available renewable and energy storage resources and system reliability needs. As a first step, rather than adopting a new clean energy standard tier, as requested in that petition, the proposed order seeks input from stakeholders on options for addressing the gap. It poses a series of questions to elicit input for the Commission to consider, starting with how to define zero emissions. This order also directs department staff, in consultation with NYSERDA, to convene a technical conference to further examine the issues identified in those questions. That concludes my summary. I and the others here welcome your questions.
Thank you, Justin. So as you point out, when the Commission first established a clean energy standard, at the time we established an approach and a management structure aligned with meeting the energy goals at that time. And since then, we've made several adjustments to those goals to align them with the CLCPA targets. And this order is very much aligned with that same purpose as the previous orders you noted. Now, given the significance of the work ahead of us in identifying the technologies, their applications, their treatments, and other factors, I think it's helpful and important that we're beginning this process the way we are, actively engaging and soliciting feedback from stakeholders in the effort to figure out exactly how best to take actions going forward, either through the development of new regulations, new requirements, or modification of existing ones. So I see this as important. If we're successful, this will give us the tools to address many of the emerging issues that we're seeing and help us hit our various reliability needs and long-term goals. So thank you for putting this together. And with that, I'll go to Commissioner Berman for comments.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I look at this and I do have some comments and perhaps some thoughts that if the staff wants to elaborate on after I share, that's fine. I do want to note that for me, from a process perspective, the agenda only had the generic case number proceeding. And, it's sort of been on record as believing that we should be more transparent. So especially when we have a full docket with a lot of different things in there, so that folks know what specifically we may be talking about. In this case, it's a little more complicated because we are talking about the petition, but that was filed August 2021, but we're not actually deciding the petition, which I do have some concerns on. For me, it's also going back and looking sort of at the history and like how we got here today. So obviously, August 1st, 2016, I was commissioner, and we voted for, actually concurred at the time on the CES Clean Energy Standard, which also established the ZECs. And looking at that, we then went shortly 3 years later, and there was a lot of process in between with the Clean Energy Standard and what we were doing with that. And, that order established under the RES Tier 1 and Tier 2, and then Tier 3 for the ZECs. And then we had in 2019 the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which really is sort of the blueprint that we're working off of now. And there are obviously in between that, the last 3 years, just like in 2016 after the CES order, there was a lot of activity on what it would mean to get ready for implementation of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. And in fact, in 2020, the State Energy Plan, which had been adopted in 2015, was amended to include the aspects of the CLCPA in that. And so that's sort of incorporated in there. And so if you go by that timeline, then the next state energy plan should be 2023, 2024. And so the CLCPA actually looked at, once you had a final scoping plan, the State Energy Planning Board would actually look at that final scoping plan and determine what to do. So in fact, it's sort of actually aligned well to update the state energy plan with all of that, the details that would go with that, as well as including whatever may come from the CLCPA, especially because the 2015 plan has the amendment from 2019 for the CLCPA. After that, on October 15th of 2020, the Clean Energy Standard was modified in order, during that modification, I actually dissented, and one of the things that I had focused on was, and again, when we modified it in Tier 1 back in April 2023, but I dissented in October 2020 for a number of reasons, but one of the reasons that I focused on was that, and expressed at the time, was that I felt that we had gone into a tortured exercise of trying to fit favored technologies in the order and exclude unfavored technologies. And I said then that I felt that we should look more holistically to what works for reliability, resiliency, and pairing technologies that might help us together, even if we didn't see them as 100% pure, but that we may need to look at what that looked like to meet our goals. And I've always sort of focused on that. I think that our state energy policies, as we try to meet them, we need to be open to, evolving and pivoting as needed, and also that ensuring that we don't lose credibility. And what the things that we can lose credibility are, credibility. We'll lose credibility if we fail in reliability. We'll lose credibility if we fail on costs. We'll lose credibility if we fail on safety. We'll lose credibility if, even if we are well intended, we are not making progress, but perhaps going backwards because we are not properly planning for the transition. And so when plants retire, if there is now a need to address that, what that looks like. And so all of these things kind of sort of build upon itself. So back in 2020, when we decided the modification order, which I dissented on, is kind of where I was coming from, and sort of consistent throughout. And that order was about procuring sufficient renewable energy resources to meet the CLCPA requirements. And I think sort of now, kind of a lot of the words that I said or my concerns back then are sort of coming into fruition. And something that I think we have to take care of and recognize, which is part of what we have today. In August of 2020, there was a petition submitted by a number of folks, including IPNY and labor, on a zero emissions petition. And that petition, sought to do a couple of things. It sought to establish a new CES tier. It sought to establish, the definition of zero emissions technologies. It sought to look at, labor and workforce development issues, as well as other things, around that to support labor. And it also sought funding, primarily ratepayer funding, for the establishment of a new tier. And that petition was SAP'd, and there were comments that came in from a number of folks. Kind of looking at it for me, a lot of them said, sort of, even if they came at it differently, the focus was either, yes, we totally support, labor and others sort of in there. And then it was, we might support, but it's premature. Or it's premature because we think the definition of zero emissions technologies should be, very, very narrow. And then there were others like MI and Nucor who were concerned about what this meant as we were still working through other things, and also that they were looking at it from the perspective of, listen, all of the CLCPA is costing. It's a lot of cost here. And, our folks can't bear this cost. And so we have to be mindful of what we're doing and not just sort of rush to, again, meet the state energy policies in a way that we are not being thoughtful. And so they were sort of advocating for, some pilots or sort of four corners, cost caps, and kind of talking a little bit and having some stakeholder outreach on that. The joint utilities and the New York ISO were pretty much aligned on, we hear you, new technologies are necessary, but we really need stakeholder conference. We really need for all of us to kind of work together and do that. The petition sat fairly dormant, despite folks saying, "Hey, what's going on?" There's been some activity over in the legislature on bills that may align or may not align with it, and so we're now here in opening up a proceeding that is going to say, yup, but not sure. Why do I say yup, but not sure? Because we're not actually deciding the petition. Implicitly, as I read it, the petition is subsumed in the order in a way that is not clear. We're pulling from it to establish why we need to open the proceeding. I support that in that it is important. We are late to the game, right? If we go back to my comments back in 2020, we need to kind of look at this, right? We've had some regulatory lag in deciding what to do. It is our responsibility under the CLCPA to define zero emissions technology. It is our responsibility to look at the ramifications of our clean energy plans as it may impact reliability, as it may impact costs, and as it may impact safety, and as it is helpful for us to establish the necessary frameworks to achieve our clean energy policies in a coherent and prudent way. The concern I have is that we have always known, and I think it's undisputed, that we need to invest in new technologies. We must help to identify and develop solutions for dispatchable technologies, and they have to be called upon as needed, and they are necessary to balance supply and demand as electricity demand grows. But we also must be mindful that as we have to be open to new and developing technologies, the challenges are real, and we have to be mindful of the role that existing baseload generation will play in the energy transition, particularly with reliability and affordability, and that's key. Now, some of the folks who don't want the petition decided, NRDC comes to mind, but there are others, or focused on the fact that sort of anti the technologies that are perhaps needing to be added, biofuels, renewable natural gas, hydrogen, and other things, right? And so their focus is that the true zero emissions technologies, like long duration energy storage, are not yet, and again, this is back in 2021, 2022, when they submitted their comments, are not yet sufficient enough, working through it. So don't give up on them. It's kind of what they're saying. I don't think having a more inclusive definition of new technologies is giving up on. I think that it is actually a recognition that we need all the tools in the toolkit to help us achieve our clean energy goals. And to do that, we need to not be so focused on picking winners and losers, in that we are actually going to chill the opportunities that may be there. And so for us, it's about trying, I think, to be more embracive of that and to ensure that we are not derailing our clean energy policies. In the order, we actually, I think, try to directly address by referencing studies from the ISO and others and the 2022 New York ISO reliability assessment in that we recognize that we are not going to get where we need to be only on renewable energy. That when we look at this, we need to be recognizing that we are reaching that tipping point. My words, not the order's words. We are reaching that tipping point where we are mindful more than we've ever been on the reliability issues and challenges there, and the daunting task of achieving our clean energy policies, and not in the order, but also, and doing that from a cost-effective perspective, which is important. So we then sort of say, okay, based on these studies, based on the New York ISO reliability assessment, which I just sort of also put an asterisk, at the end of June, the New York ISO will be issuing its what I think is a signature must-read power trends report that will also help to give us some flavor on where we're going and what we may need to do. I think it's interesting to note that the New York ISO used to do a reliability study every year. They have also recognized, rightfully so, that the changing landscape is so fast now that they're doing that on a quarterly basis. They're extending out even some of the things that they would do statutorily in other things from a study perspective on that may impact what they're doing to help inform and give us their best technical information and advice. And so they're doing this quarterly reliability study, and then it looks out every 5 years. So, that is really helpful because it also is showing that what is normal regulatory lag has to even pick up the pace even more, because we can't, some of our studies, we have to keep continually updating and looking at and refining, because that situational awareness is happening so much more faster, right? We're losing that if we don't keep it up. There's so many things that are hitting us, and that is important. We go on. So we say, thank you for this petition. We're gonna take some good stuff from this, and we're gonna now have this technical conference. And here's a bunch of questions that we're gonna ask you to think about as we move forward with this technical conference. It's helpful. I think some folks looking at the questions, though, may say, these are really open-ended questions, almost like if your kid's applying for college application, very open-ended. You can answer it in many different ways. And that's good, I think. But I worry what that means from regulatory certainty. So my first question is, how do we help folks feel comfortable in hitting the mark, in giving us information? And then what's the parameters? So a lot of people feel like, I don't know why I bother. This is, I'm in somebody's head right now, not mine. I don't know why I bother submitting comments, because I never know if they're actually going to read them. I never know if they're actually going to look at them. And if they do, it's like 2 years at best that they get to them. And my comments may be stale. They may have already been addressed either for me or against me in another docket. They may actually be in a 3rd, 4th, 5th, or 6th docket. So what do I do here? So how would you answer folks who say that and what this all means?
I think that the commission and DPS staff does a phenomenal job in we have a platform upon which to review all public comments. It's a publicly available platform. I'm not sure that any other agency of the state has such a platform. And we, as in this order, have summarized every single one of the public comments, and we addressed each of them. So I think that this commission and the department does a great job of doing that.
Okay, so thank you for that. I'm not sure that answers my question, but I'm not saying anyone doesn't do a good job. I'm really trying to establish regulatory certainty in the process. So, for example, we do not decide here that we are voting for or against a new CES tier, that we're silent on that. We do not decide the labor issues. We do not decide the ratepayer funding issues. We do not decide the definition of zero emissions. However, we expressly say we do have the authority to define zero emission technologies. We are looking at that, and we are going to make a decision. So the question becomes, let's say we get comments that come in and say, no CES new tier, yes CES tier. When it comes back to us, is then that on our plate where we decide yes CES tier, no CES tier, or for regulatory certainty, we say we recognize that this is an option, and we are going to now have a new proceeding with hopefully a case number that's not the generic case number, so people can track it easier, including me. And we SAPA that, perhaps with a staff white paper, perhaps not. How does it look from a regulatory certainty? Now, that's just one question. Could get an answer to a question that says, I don't care whether you do a CES tier or not. I actually think the answer is X, Y, and Z. Totally new, totally different, another option. Do we say in the same order, yes, no, CES tier, that's a new thing, that goes somewhere else, you got to make a petition. I'm just trying to honestly understand what the parameters are, because one of the questions is about how should we be aligned as a state with others. Now, that could be other state agencies, it could be other states, it could be the federal government, it could be internationally, it could be a whole host of things, right? If things come in there, for me, all of that information, there needs to be some type of filter that says, okay, this great thought, the commission is determining, okay, that's an energy storage issue. That's over here on the pending docket. This is something that goes into the gas planning, something that filters through so that we don't wind up having the super regulatory proceeding that goes beyond what I think is what we're trying to address is definition of zero emissions technologies, what that looks like, how that may impact what we're doing. That's kind of the question I have. I guess that's my second question.
I think all of the issues that you raised, as you noted, they're in the draft order before you. The question regarding whether or not there should be a new CES tier, the ideas of perhaps aligning with other state agencies and even other states or the federal government, and then the obvious point of the need to define the term zero emissions and to determine eligibility of the types of technologies that would meet that definition. So all of those are issues that the petition and this order have clearly triggered, and they're all very important issues that are going to be dealt with at first at a technical conference, after which we will obviously seek advice and we will provide recommendations to this commission regarding next steps regarding all of those issues.
Okay. I do just want to make it very clear to folks, and thank you for that, Bob. I do want to make it very clear to folks. I think it's very important that we think about those. If we're trying to engage people, we have to also think about this from a regulatory certainty perspective and look at what it is fits in this bucket from a four corners. Because one, I think it's going to be, if we just open it to so much, it's going to be a nightmare for everyone to deal with. And I think that part of what should come is what the four corners of this is. And so I guess I'll ask the question, which is, so after we decide this draft order and and assuming it's voted in favor to open the docket, so we open this draft order, we say we're going to have a technical conference, we then have the technical conference. Oh, and with this order, it lays out, I think, 14 questions. People can add on other questions as well. We have the technical conference. We open it up to a number of folks, and then it comes back for something to us, right? What does it mean for the petition that was filed August 2021?
So I think you're referencing just the concept of regulatory certainty. So this commission doesn't get a ton of petitions. Certainly this was one. I can think of others. There is, obviously, I think that this commission is very transparent and tries to deal with issues as they come. And so we strongly, want to maintain the ability of parties to file petitions and want them to file petitions. With that said, just so we understand what the legal requirements are, there are no requirements for the commission to address in a formal way or informal way a petition that's filed by an outside party. Nor is there, even if we do, even if the commission decides to take one up, there's no sort of time frame that's specified there. So I think as far as, regulatory certainty goes, and I think outside parties know this, staff is the primary mechanism through which, white papers and proposals are filed with the commission for consideration. Outside petitions, although they're extremely important and may in fact, provide an impetus for white papers from staff, are not something that, that the commission has ever determined has to be taken up.
Thank you. I'm going to give you my perspective, having been a staffer and having been an outside observer and now a commissioner. I think that there is a process management that happens with the petitions that come in. Other things come in, but let's just focus on petitions, requests for declaratory rulings, and a whole host of things, right? And there is a need, as I see it, for some regulatory certainty on what we are doing with petitions that come in. Now, we often SAPA the petitions. Sometimes we don't SAPA them, declaratory rule, and assuming the ones that we have to SAPA, we SAPA. I do feel that we also are needing to look at what it looks like from a timeline, right? What is the average timeline for when a petition comes in to when we decide it? Whether it is a petition for rehearing, whether it's a, first impression petition that comes in. And I think that it is sort of docket management in terms of looking at it. Look, when you're in the court system, and I worked in the court system, as a senior court attorney, you had, you were supposed to help to move the dockets and clear off the backlog of it. We have a backlog with some petitions, right, that are existing beyond, 6 months, beyond a year, beyond 2 years. And that's not healthy when we want people to see how we are moving. Now, some petitions may just be, look, we got your petition. We don't believe this is something that we're going to decide at this, or this petition really fits in X bucket. And that's where it is. Or we got your petition, we're working through it, and, we hear you. And we expect to reach a decision, within the year, within 2 years, or never, right? I think that might actually be helpful and healthy for people. Or to say, we are about to decide that petition that you submitted comments in 5 years ago. Refresh your comments if you wish, and give them time. So I look at this now, and the lack of clarity for me is the August 2021 petition still exists. It goes dormant, I guess, because we're focused over here on this new technical conference, et cetera. And we pulled some of it, but not all of it. So folks should be thinking about what that looks like as they move forward in the technical conference, because we have not determined the petition is granted in part, denied in part, not decided in part, whatever it is. I have my opinion on what it means on the petition implicitly, but we actually have not, as a body, actually voted on. We're not actually voting on that petition. We're just pulling parts of it out. And I think that's that lack of regulatory certainty has tripped us up before. It has tripped up parties before, where they thought they were deciding something over here, and then all of a sudden the dormant proceeding came back to life, and we decided it over there. Or they got told in the thing that we were working on, by the way, we're deciding this, but we're not deciding that, because you really should be focused on it on that dormant proceeding over there, because that's where we may or may not decide it. I've raised this not as criticism. I raise it because I believe that it is important for us to openly address the elephants in the room that people talk about, and that to help us in a process perspective is exactly why we, the majority, had a CLCPA tracker to help us with all of this. So this new generic proceeding actually falls within the new bucket of something for us to track, but it's not just about tracking for tracking's sake of, these are the, 20 best top 10 things we've done, on CLCPA, but it's to help people from a process perspective so that they can then be substantively informed and inform us and give us information. So that's just my process sort of focus. The other thing that I do have a question on is, in here, when we're doing the technical conference, we say that we are doing it in consultation with NYSERDA. And I'd like to understand that. Why are we including NYSERDA in this technical conference in consultation? I guess first threshold is, are they aware that they're going to be doing this technical conference with us? The second really is why do we need NYSERDA to be, they can be a participant in the technical conference. Why do they need to be in consultation doing this technical conference with us as sort of working with staff, with our staff?
Commissioner, we're going to be drawing on NYSERDA's capacity in a couple of different respects. And
And Justin, I think it's helpful if you speak. Don't be afraid to shout. So speak up.
I'll try to get between what I was doing and shouting. DPS will run the technical conference. The department will run the conference. NYSERDA will be extremely helpful because they have capabilities and capacity that will be additional to what we can bring to bear. And they also have resources, among other things, the resources that have informed the integration analysis that they did pursuant to the CLCPA, that we're definitely going to be drawing on regardless. To your point about whether or not they ought to merely be a participant or help to organize and orchestrate the conference, I think that's simply a practicality. I think they'll be very helpful, and they will not be driving.
So I understand that our staff will be leading. I'm going to give you my impression. I think we need to be clearer on the lines of responsibility between our staff and NYSERDA. I don't see the nexus in the need for this to be a joint, even if we lead, technical conference with NYSERDA. Fully want NYSERDA to participate. I think that's important. I think to the extent that we need some of their integration analysis, we could ask for that. It's actually not mentioned in the order that it just says in consultation with NYSERDA. The reason I feel strongly about this is that we do oversee NYSERDA. We have a lot of things that we need to look at. And I think the lines get blurry when we utilize NYSERDA with our staff in a way that bleeds in, that you can't tell one from the other, even if one is the lead or not. And at times, I think it becomes challenging for that. Here, I don't see it. Right? Maybe if we were looking at, for example, again, it's just something for us to think about. Maybe if we were looking at, something that NYSERDA would then have to do an RFP on, maybe there's a reason for having them in consultation. Even that, we might have to also look at what that looks like in terms of crossing all of us together, right? Cross-pollination. Not sure that this is healthy. I also think to the extent that we are doing it because they have the resources, they have the capacity, I bristle at that. We need to then be strong in saying these are the resources that we as an agency need, as a commission needs, and we should not be beholden to NYSERDA to be providing us with the capacity and the resources. It's not healthy. It's not healthy for the agency, and it's not healthy for the commission. You don't have to answer that. I'm just giving you my really unvarnished opinion. And so it's too easy for us to get in the habit of saying, well, in consultation with, because we've always done that. Oh, we did it, and we can point to a bunch of different orders. I generally raise concerns about this, but I'm really zoned in on this because I don't see the nexus at all. It was sort of thrown in there, and it concerns me. Plus, NYSERDA shouldn't know what we're doing in this capacity until they're sort of brought into the umbrella here. And so, for me, it's something that sort of stands out. So, I guess I feel strongly. I am supportive of the draft order. I think it's important to initiate the process to identify technologies to close the gap. I think it's important to identify actions to pursue zero emissions by 2040 target. I think we should be doing it, in a accelerated fashion. I think we need to look very strongly and get under the hood on the issues with reliability. I also think that when we get input from stakeholders, we need to have an understanding of the weight it bears depending on who is giving it to us. For example, if there are technical aspects in there, we need to rely on the technical experts. If there are reliability issues laden in there, We need to rely on the reliability experts like the ISO and the Reliability Council. And it has a higher concentration, it has a higher weight, right? So we have to be able to not just say, well, everybody likes it or everybody doesn't, right? Because we got bombarded. I do believe that the order has maybe some of the stuff in there for the first time clearly expressly identifies that we are realizing that the challenges of getting to where we need to be, that the false narrative around that. I do think we need to get under the hood a little bit. Administration has already admitted that there are huge costs in some aspects of our clean energy plans based on the CLCPA, but we do have to get under the hood more on all of that. It does not mean that then we are doing that to derail. It actually means that we are showing that we are credible in what we're doing to be good stewards of the folks that we regulate and good stewards of ratepayer dollars as we move forward. And so we need to look at that and make sure we're okay with that. I also do want to say that the other things that are outside of this seems like a lot of people have forgotten that the State Energy Planning Board does actually have to do something with the final scoping plan and the state energy plan. The new version of the state energy plan needs to be done, but it needs to be done not just in a quick, yeah, all good, here you go, and slap it on. It needs to follow the same transparent and orderly process and under the energy law, also the different studies and applications that need to be done as well. And that's something that will be informative for us as a commission. So I thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Alisi?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Rather than just adopt the new clean energy standard tier, I think it makes perfect sense to seek input from stakeholders to define the moving target of zero emissions. My comments are brief, but I think that goes to the target of what this does, and I think it's good work. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Edwards?
Thank you. I have no questions. I will be supporting this item.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Howard?
Yeah, I have a couple questions, brief ones. Because we're saying one of these resources, potential resources that are needed, is zero emission, that does not presume that it would be renewable. Correct? At this stage in the process, let's put it that way.
So one of the competing priorities that informs this order is the need to comply with statutory language, which includes the term zero emissions and the term renewable.
Yeah.
So sorting out how those two overlap will be one of the tasks.
Well, and to the extent that the scoping plan says we need to find something that just doesn't exist yet, you know, at the first blush when this came, you know, I do thank everybody who's worked on this and edited it to its final version today, because it did have a little bit of the search for Captain Kirk sort of air about it, meaning we got to find some technology somewhere that does something that meets the statutory requirement. And that I believe that this is process as outlined here is much more reality based. And again, I think to sort of echo Commissioner Berman's comment, that this is the entity that needs to be the reality based decision maker. It doesn't necessarily seem to be emerging from other state agencies or authorities. But again, it's our job to say what can work and what can't work. The other question is, this order doesn't presuppose that every technology that may come up in a technical conference is worth pursuing, correct?
Correct.
And the reason I say that is because, since the original initiating order in 2015, know what we found out? All this stuff takes a lot longer than we anticipated. A lot longer. In some cases, decade plus, and that is with, well established technologies. So, this is, really critical. One of the questions I also have is, will there be some particular focus on locational requirements? Because these devices might be in the right technology, but maybe in the wrong place to enhance system reliability.
I think the short answer is yes. The way in which a zero emissions requirement interacts with the reliability needs of different NISO regions in the state will certainly cause there to be, I guess you could say, different needs or potentially different.
So, in other words, what may be applicable in Zone A may not work in Zone J. Ish. So, meaning that
potentially, though, it's funny you should mention Zone A. If you look at NISO's 21 to 2040 report, it actually highlights that what NISO refers to as DEFRs, their term for zero emissions dispatchable resources, they identify a need in Zone A as well as Zone J. So
I got it.
Within the state, you're going to have diverse reliability needs in light of what exists now and what is projected for 2040.
Thank you. Well, first of all, one of the most important things of this order, I think, will be expedition. If this goes on and on and on, we're just waiting for, that new great idea to pop up, or advocates or stakeholders say, but just wait, it's right around the corner. This is a really good something. I think that's crazy, because we have to deal with what technologies are literally available today, because if we don't do that, we are going to miss our timetables because these things take so long to develop. And I would be very loath if we came back with a recommendation, let's be the first in the nation to buy this. That would be, we have a bad history of that in New York. And let's try not to do that this time. But again, I think within 12 months, something that comes back with a preliminary report is like a generous amount of time, because I personally don't think there are that many new exotic ideas out there. And the sooner we get a catalog of them, and as Commissioner Berman pointed out, somebody's going to like some and somebody's going to hate them. So again, so I would be very, very cautious as well as being expeditious. So throwing things that don't seem particularly reasonable early on, throwing them out the window would be, we'd all be well served. But again, I'll be supporting this, and really, it's all gets down to how good a job we do in terms of soliciting comments and writing something up that we can share. And just to that end, part of this may be what the world thinks exists in terms of a technology. It's just not right there now. So, much of the CLCPA was based on real good hopes and dreams, and well-intentioned, but not necessarily implementable. So, again, that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Valesky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Justin and team, thank you for bringing this forward for our consideration. I think it's really, really important. I've spoken certainly on more than one occasion from this dais about reliability, and as we march along, as the calendar moves forward towards 70 by 30 and 0 by 40, that becomes more and more important. So I think this is really important that we're taking this up today. And in fact, if someone were to ask me, what is the commission doing about reliability? There's a lot of ways that question could be answered. I think I probably would say, well, first and foremost, go read case number 15E0302. And oh, by the way, read it quickly because the timeline issue that Commissioner Howard raised, I think, is really important. The date in the order for comments to come back in terms of feedback from those questions is July 17th. Which interestingly is right around the time that we'll hear that we'll receive the NISO report at the end of June. So I think that will be very helpful. That timeline will work well. And then the technical conference, I believe 120 days, no later than 120 days from today, which would be by mid-September at the latest. So those who are interested in participating, get right to it. And I think we could very well hopefully see something further as soon as by the end of this calendar year for our further consideration. So thank you again. This is a very important item, and I'm pleased to support it.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner Majori?
Thank you. I don't have any questions or additional comments other than that I look forward to seeing, assuming this item passes, I'm looking forward to seeing the comments that come back as a result. And I might have more to say based on an action that comes from that. But I have nothing else to say or ask about this particular item. I do plan to support it.
Thank you, Commissioner. So I'll now do the call for vote. My vote is in favor of the recommendation to initiate the process regarding the zero emissions target as discussed. Commissioner Berman, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Alisi?
Yes.
Commissioner Edwards?
Yes.
Commissioner Howard?
Yes.
Commissioner Valesky?
Yes.
Commissioner Majori?
Yes.
Thank you. The item is approved and the recommendations are adopted. Thank you, Commissioners. Thank you, Justin. We'll now move to the second item for discussion today. Item 302, case 23-E-0199, as it relates to the report on electric system preparations for the upcoming summer. It'll be presented to us today by Michael Touche and Andrew Timbrook. In addition to them, we'll have Tammy Mitchell, Leica Jonal, and Paul Darmenko available for questions. Mike, please begin.
Tech team, could you please 10 seconds? Thank you. Good morning, Chair, Commissioners. My name is Michael Touche. I'm a utility engineering specialist in the electric safety and reliability section of the Office of Energy System Planning and Performance. Today, we will be briefing you on the state's electric transmission and distribution system summer preparedness for the upcoming 2023 summer season. You can progress to slide 3. Thank you. So each spring, staff conducts its annual review of the electric system and utilities preparedness to meet peak summer operating conditions for New York. This review focuses on the electric system reliability and is part of our normal course of business at the department and is a high priority review. Peak summer operating conditions are often when the electric system can be most stressed, and we look to each of the utilities and the NISO for assurances that we are well prepared to meet New York customer needs for the upcoming season. This review consists of an assessment of the NISO's projected demand forecast and supply resource availability. And additionally, staff issues its annual summer preparedness review to each of the utilities and reviews all responses, as well as conducts interviews with each utility to discuss planned and completed system reinforcements, spare equipment inventories, and to confirm that they will be able to reliably meet customer demands for the upcoming summer period. Through these surveys and interviews, we find that each utility has completed or will complete all major planned reinforcements, inspections, and repairs prior to the start of the summer operating season, and will have adequate spare equipment on hand to meet unforeseen circumstances or system events. Based on staff's review and assessment of the utility data, meetings with each of the individual utilities and the NISO, we find that the state's electric transmission and distribution systems are prepared to reliably meet forecast 2023 summer electric demands. Next slide, please. Thank you. Now we'll take a look at the forecasted load compared to available supply resources for the upcoming summer. This chart shows the historic actuals and forecasted statewide peak demand as projected by the NYSO. The blue line on the right shows the 2023 peak load forecast over the next 10 years. The summer's peak load forecast is consistent with what we've seen over the past several years. The NYSO's baseline forecast projection of approximately 32,048 megawatts for the 23 summer season. Looking out over the next 10 years, the peak load forecast remains relatively flat and begins to rise in the latter years as increases in electrification and projected load from existing and future large load projects interconnecting to the transmission system are realized, which is offset in part by the positive effects of the state's energy efficiency programs and to underlying forecast econometric growth rates. Next slide, please. Thank you. Corresponding to the previous graph, this chart shows the cumulative forecast impacts of the contribution of energy efficiency and distributed generation towards reducing said peak demands. The blue bar represents the forecasted energy efficiency impacts, whereas the red represents the impacts associated with distributed generation. By the year 2033, the combined effect of these programs is projected to help lower the peak demand by approximately 6.3 gigawatts. Next slide, please. Thanks. This slide highlights the expected available resource capability for 2023. Installed generating capacity for the 2023 totals is approximately 36,990 megawatts, a decrease of approximately 430 megawatts from the 2022 numbers. This decrease in generating capacity can primarily be attributed to small generator deactivations and or deratings to some fossil generators. Combining the installed generation capacity with the projected demand response and special case resources as well as net firm purchase imports provides New York with a total of approximately 41,148 megawatts worth of capacity resources for the 2023 summer period. That's approximately 467 megawatts increased from the previous year. The 467 megawatt increase in net firm purchase imports from 2022 is simply the market's way of economically procuring the necessary capacity needed to reliably serve the forecast peak load in New York. Next slide, please. Thank you. The New York State Reliability Council has set the 2023 to 2024 installed reserve margin at 20% above the forecasted above the forecasted peak demand. This 20% installed reserve requirement translates to approximately 6,410 megawatts of minimum requirement above the forecasted peak demand, for a total installed capacity of approximately 38,458 megawatts. As mentioned previously, the total available capacity for 2023 is approximately 41,148 megawatts, which is 2,690 megawatts above the minimum required. This equates to an actual installed reserves of approximately 28.4% above the forecasted peak for 2023, providing further cushion to serve the peak load beyond the 20% margin required by the New York State Reliability Council. To further help curb peak energy system demands, each of the utilities have load relief programs in place which customers are compensated for providing load reductions when called upon. Currently, there's approximately 1,150 megawatts enrolled in these programs for the 2023 season to further facilitate peak demand reductions during the summer's hottest days. Additionally, the NYSO and each utility have operating procedures in place to further mitigate any unforeseen reliability issues. These emergency operating procedures include, and are not limited to, emergency demand response programs, voltage reductions, voluntary industrial curtailments, and emergency purchases, among others. The NISO projects that approximately 3,160 megawatts will be available under these emergency operating procedures if needed for the summer period, which provides a further cushion to serve load above the 28.4% actual IRM, installed reserve margin. Now, this concludes my portion of the presentation. Given all the information that we've presented here, staff believes that the electric system is adequately prepared to reliably meet New York customers' needs for the summer of 2023. And I'll now turn it over to my colleague Andrew Timbrook to discuss the projected summer pricing outlook. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Good morning, Chair Christian and Commissioners. My name is Andy Timbrook, and I'm a utility engineering specialist in the Office of Rates and Tariffs. Could we have the next slide, please? Thanks. In this portion of the presentation, I will be providing a summary of how the utilities have performed at reducing electric supply price volatility for their full-service residential customers. This will include an overview of the utilities' residential electric supply portfolio composition for this coming summer, a comparison of this summer's energy futures to last summer's futures and actual prices, the capacity price changes as compared to summer 2022, and lastly, I will present the statewide estimated supply bill impacts for this upcoming summer as compared to the last several years for full-service residential electric customers using projected utility supply bill estimates that include utilities hedging plans. Before I begin, I will reiterate the electric market prices are dependent on present market conditions, and the utilities under commission jurisdiction have no control over the market price. The cost of electricity is determined largely by the energy and capacity markets administered by the NISO. However, the utilities do have the ability to mitigate the month-to-month volatility of end-use supply prices for their mass market customers through hedging and their supply rate mechanisms. The end-use full-service mass market residential supply rate mechanisms do have some flexibility through the ability to mitigate large reconciliations caused by actual market price changes, a practice that utilities have utilized more frequently in the last several years. My presentation will focus on measuring how the utilities have performed at that task historically and what steps the utilities have taken to manage any market price volatility that may occur this upcoming summer. Next slide. This graph shows the result of the utilities' electric supply price volatility mitigation efforts dating back to December of 2008. The red line is the average New York ISO market price volatility. The blue line is the volatility of the utilities' residential electric supply portfolios. Each point in the line represents the volatility over a 12-month period as measured by the coefficient of variation. As you can see from the graph, the utilities' electric supply portfolio has consistently experienced less volatility as compared to the market. The high points on the graph show various points over the past 10 years where market price volatility spiked. During those times, the utilities' portfolios generally experienced significantly less volatility. This performance is attributable to the hedging practices that the utilities employ to smooth the unpredictability of market prices. As previously mentioned, the utilities, through their supply rate mechanisms, each have the ability to, and have, at various points, flexed a large reconciliation of prior period under or over recoveries of supply costs over multiple months to mitigate the impact of unpredictable market price swings that would have caused high price volatility for their full-service mass market residential customers. Overall, as compared to the market price volatility, the statewide portfolio should be expected to continue to experience less volatility going forward. Next slide. This chart shows the elements of the composite residential electric supply portfolio for this summer across all investor-owned utilities. As shown, about 53% of the portfolio consists of fixed price contracts. Of those, the majority are financial in nature. The fixed portion of the portfolio also includes newer physical contracts, older legacy contracts, and a small amount of the utility's own generation with fixed fuel cost as well as NYPA contracts. The balance of the portfolio is predominantly made up of market purchases, followed by relatively small amounts of utilities' own generation with variable fuel costs and index contracts that are primarily indexed to natural gas. Next slide. This chart shows this upcoming summer's expected average energy market prices based on ICE futures, last summer's futures, and last summer's actual prices for New York City, the Hudson Valley, and Western New York, or New York ISO zones J, G, and A, respectively. Last summer's expected energy market prices that we reported to you in May are shown in green. Last summer's actual market prices are shown in blue, and this summer's expected market prices are shown in red. As you can see, this summer's expected prices are lower than the futures prices from this time last year by approximately 30 to 40%, and lower than the actual prices from last year by over 50%. Last summer, the actual prices ended up between 36 and 48% higher than what was expected going into the summer period, which was primarily due to rising natural gas prices, which continues to be the predominant fuel determining energy market prices. This summer, gas prices have come down, which has also reduced expected energy market prices. I would like to note, however, that actual prices will likely vary from futures due to a variety of factors, including weather, economic conditions, and demand on the system. Next slide. This next slide shows what last year's summer strip auction capacity prices were and what this upcoming summer's prices are. As you can see, there's projected to be very little change in price with the exception of the New York City capacity zone. The main driver of this price increase is the retirement of several smaller peaker units in the New York City capacity zone, as well as a slightly higher peak load forecast in New York City, which is slated to increase by 333 megawatts. Next slide. So this slide shows additional years of historic capacity prices for the two capacity zones that impact the New York City area. As you can see by the graph, this summer's capacity prices for these zones are within the range of historic prices dating back to 2014. Next slide. This last slide in my portion of the presentation provides a bit of context for how the expected change in market prices could impact the electric supply portion of customer bills. This chart shows an estimate of the supply portion of a typical residential monthly bill as a result of the year-to-year changes in the load-weighted full-service mass market residential commodity prices. For the chart, we consider a typical residential customer to use 600 kilowatt hours per month, which is close to the statewide average but can vary by utility. The summer month bill estimate for this upcoming summer, cumulatively for June through September, is expected to be about 3% lower than last summer on a statewide average basis. This slight decrease in the 2023 bill estimate as compared to 2022 reflects the expected changes in market prices as well as the impact from the utilities hedging programs. I should note that depending on where a customer is located in the state, what utility they are served by, their actual use, actual market prices, their summer commodity bill will vary from what's shown here and could be higher or lower than last summer. As of now, it is expected that customers in the Con Edison, New York City area may see increased supply costs this summer as compared to last, due primarily to the increased capacity costs we showed on the previous slides. In most other parts of the state, it is expected that supply costs will be lower due to expected lower energy market prices. So to conclude, the utilities have continued to perform well at reducing the month-to-month price volatility as compared to the market volatility, and have maintained approximately a 53% fixed price hedge level for this summer on a statewide average basis, which should mitigate any significant unexpected price spikes should they occur. Further, we continue to communicate with utilities and monitor their full-service mass market customer supply price mechanisms and consider any adjustments as needed to improve volatility mitigation efforts. Those efforts resulted in a recent change to Con Edison's supply price mechanism, as approved by this commission in May 2022. So that concludes our presentation. We are available for any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Michael. And Michael, I know this was your first time. I want to acknowledge you did a great job.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
No problem. I do have one question for you before we move on. Would you mind going back one slide? Okay. Great. So this is a slide showing the change in capacity prices over several years. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And is this in any way adjusted to take into account the effects of inflation?
No, it is not.
This is not adjusted. Okay, I just wanted to make that clear. So one could argue that though the price is higher this year, it's not entirely out of line and with the previous high prices, and may actually be lower when adjusted for inflation when compared to those prices.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, I appreciate the presentation. It's good to see that we're in a well-positioned to handle what's coming at us this summer with a fairly hefty reserve margin. I know the variability is always weather. So one question I would like to follow up with, and just a hypothetical. Under what conditions do you think it possible where the reserve margin could erode to the point where we would need to activate those emergency resources you mentioned earlier, that 3 gigawatts and I think the additional 1 gigawatt demand response? Is that something you could talk to a little bit?
So besides, I'll just say besides unexpected warmer than weather conditions for longer periods than we had anticipated as an obvious, could be an obvious stressor to that. Another would be unforeseen outages of generator outages, I would say. I'm not sure. I could defer to Luck if you have anything else that you could think of that would push it past that 28.4% margin. I'm not sure about past that, though.
No, I think that would sum it up. Unusually high demands, major generating assets not being available. Those are the two basic drivers there.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. Okay, I'll move on to Commissioner Berman. You have comments?
Thank you. This was helpful. Kind of looking at this, I do want to point out NERC yesterday released their summer reliability assessment and identified risks of energy shortfalls during periods of extreme demand. At least my sort of take on it, we're looking at it, is New York doesn't fall in the emergency issues based on the ISO's assessment of having adequate capacity margins and operating procedures that can handle normal issues that arise. Obviously, there's things that come up extreme that may change the dynamic. But do you want to comment on NERC's summer reliability assessment?
Commissioner, I didn't actually have a chance to read through that yet, but I did hear that New York is not one of those red flagged areas for this summer. So that's always good news. And I think, as Michael mentioned and noted, that we're in good shape where we stand today to meet this summer's peak demands based on available capacity, transmission system, distribution system. It appears that we're in good shape today.
Right. And I do just want to point out, even though, at least my read on it, the NERC summer assessment, didn't have us in the red zone, it does have other regions in the red zone. And that's something for us to keep in mind because we are dependent on things that might happen outside of our ISO. And so to the extent that, looking at it, and obviously I think NERC's real area of concern was the U.S. West having an elevated risk because of regional heat events that increase demand and strain transmissions. But we have our own challenges that we also need to sort of look at, out there. The other thing that I saw, and again, I didn't, is really from a sort of a layman's term, is that NERC identified non-weather related reliability risks that I think we also have to sort of take into account, supply chain issues, and that really will challenge our folks in terms of maintenance and summer preparedness issues because of the supply chain, and will delay some resource additions, and we have to take that into account. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we do. I think Michael mentioned earlier that we surveyed utilities, and one of the things we survey is actually their spare equipment, and they keep a pretty good log. The spare equipment inventory is in good shape, but they did inform us that going forward, ordering newer stuff is simply going to take longer to obtain and more expensive. But for this coming summer, in the short term, they seem to be well stocked, so to speak.
Right. Okay, thanks. I know that impacts Kevin Wisely's group as well in terms of extreme weather and emergency response issues that come up. And I did see that FERC staff issued their summer reliability assessment as we were in session, and I believe that that comes out. And my understanding is that they do have within a week or two an opportunity for states to, work with FERC in terms of what it means and what it may mean for engagement with, our utilities and the ISO. So I look forward to being a part of that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Lisi?
Thank you, Chair. I guess it goes without saying that a lot of talent and hard work goes into producing this. Thank you. And I suppose we should enjoy it while we can.
Commissioner Edwards? Thank you.
No questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Howard?
Yeah, I just have one question, and just maybe it goes along with the observation. Just so explain to me, New York has maybe the highest reserve margin requirements of the 50 states, and we've been well served by that over time. And as it relates to the capacity auction increases, I'm not asking you to look into the future because we'll get there soon enough. But again, just explain why we historically have such a higher reserve margin than the rest of the country, because it's not free. And particularly as we see it when there are reductions in, physical units available, you see that in the capacity auction. So if you just explain why we do it and why we pay more.
I'll try to answer that question. I'll be honest with you, I'm not familiar with all 50 states' installed reserve margins, but New York State's reserve margin has varied in the last 20 years from, say, 15.5% to 22% at times. It's a complicated process that the New York State Reliability Council uses to develop that installed reserve margins based on a host of factors at the time, and that's the minimum that they see fit to meet minimum reliability criteria. So I can't speak to the other states what they're doing. I know Texas has a very unusual method. I'm not going to even try to opine on that, and it's typically much lower, I know, than New York's, but
right.
Regardless.
And going forward, we believe cumulatively that high level of margin will need to be maintained in perpetuity.
I don't know if I want to characterize the high level of margin. I mean, it's the margin.
Well, our historic levels of reserve margin need to be maintained,
I think,
in the future.
As a sufficient and installed reserve margin will need to be maintained in the future. It's going to vary as we go through time, depending on system conditions and resources and all of that. I can't predict what it would be, but it's evaluated every year in a very rigorous manner. So, and the New York State, the DPS staff is part of that, and of course, there's a whole host of stakeholders involved in it as well.
Anyway, but thank you. I hope if we're here next year, the news is just as good.
We hope so too.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Valesky?
Thank you both for your report. I have no questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Majori?
Hi, thank you. The way I received this report is that we're not expecting to have a big problem this summer, which I think is good news. So sort of a case of not a lot of news is good news. As you were presenting, there was one question that occurred to me that I think is a quick one. The actual price of natural gas was higher last year than was predicted beforehand, and we're expecting it to be lower this year. What happened that led to the higher cost, and why do we expect that whatever that was does not repeat again?
Hi, Commissioner. This is Paul Dermetko. I think a lot of what happened last year was, global supply need increased significantly. I'll say most likely due to the war in Ukraine and what's going on over there overseas. I think there was less gas production last year, where that has ramped up again this year to meet global supply needs. So I think it will most likely be less of a concern this year, hopefully. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. Other than that, I don't have any additional questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. And with that, bring us to we don't need to vote on an item for discussion, do we? All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Andrew. Paul. Thank you. Okay. And with that, we're now going to move on to the consent agenda. Do any commissioners wish to comment on or recuse from voting on any of the items on today's consent agenda? I'll begin with Commissioner Berman.
Item 369, I am concurring.
Thank you. Commissioner Alisi?
No questions or comments. I'll be supporting.
Thank you. Commissioner Edwards?
I will be supporting all items with the exception of 370 and 375. I am recusing.
Thank you. Commissioner Howard?
I'll be supporting the agenda with the exception of 370 and 375, where I will be a no, consistent with my previous votes.
Thank you. Commissioner Valesky?
No questions or comments on any of the items.
And Commissioner Majori?
I have no comments. I will support the entire consent agenda.
Thank you very much. So now we'll do a call for a vote. My vote is in favor of the recommendations on the consent agenda. Commissioner Berman, how do you vote?
Yes, with the exception of 369, I concur.
Thank you. Commissioner Alisi?
Yes on all items.
Thank you. Commissioner Edwards?
Yes on all items with the exception of 370, 375.
Right. Thank you. Commissioner Howard?
Yes, on all items with the exception of 370 and 375, where I'm a no.
Thank you. Commissioner Valesky?
Yes on all items.
Thank you. And Commissioner Majori?
Yes on all items.
Excellent. We have sufficient votes. The items are approved and the recommendations are adopted. Thank you, everyone. Madam Secretary, is there anything further to come before us today?
There's nothing further today.
Thank you very much. Before I adjourn, I can see everybody's getting ready to go. Given the discussion on reliability that we've been having that's been permeating the conversation, I think it might be helpful at some point in the not too distant future for us to have a discussion and presentation from staff on the various actions we've taken and their potential impact on reliability. So be on the lookout for that at some point in the near future. I'll work with staff to put that together. All right. Thank you, everyone. I adjourn.